Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Deep Q Cast. Happy hour is in session, as always. We have our attendees in chief over here, Matt Reed and Carlos Zendejas. Carlos always looked like I saw him while we were prepping. He still has his Patriot water, as per usual.
Never. Are you going to try anything else, Carla? No.
When Costco stops selling Bud Light, I will switch to something else. No, I think probably in the summer. Maybe I like to mix it up a little bit, but right now,
maybe when we see BTC hit 100,000, we'll see him switch to something else. Maybe that we can do that like a celebratory.
We're all going to be drinking Glenlivet 25s, like as water
out of the bottle.
I mean, what are we, like barbarians?
I'll drink it out my shoe if it hits 100K.
Holding you to that. We have this. We're recording this, by the way, Matt. Just so that you know.
That's fine. I'll do it.
Matty Boy's going to do a shoey with Glenlivet 25. I love it.
It's like, what's like noti musty notes.
Oh, yeah.
What you got over there, Matt?
I went for, you may never have heard of it, Guinness. Have you heard of that?
Oh, might have.
I had actually given up beer for Lent. It didn't last for very long. So I think they just like teleported in my hand when I went out for food the other evening. And
I blacked out.
I was like, oh, well, there goes Lent.
Okay, there we go.
That's how I'm rolling.
Love it. Good.
What have you got?
Good, man. I've always been a stout guy myself.
What have you got over there, Rob? Anything?
I've just got, honestly, I was like, I'm going to try to get a workout in. So I just have I have literally just like the most generic thing possible. Coke Zero, obviously trying to keep the sugar free. And then I just have some water. So I'm going to, I'll send you a photo of me drinking alcohol in like
after
2 hours.
The gym.
It doesn't matter about us. What matters is our literally dozens of viewers that now know that you're not down for the happy hour vibes, man.
I know. Well,
it's 5 o'clock somewhere.
It is. I know. I'll make up for it. I'll be double fisting next week just to make up for this.
There you go. That's the one.
I'm gonna make
That's
up
the
for
one.
It. It's cumulative, right? It's like slow and steady wins the race.
To quote a very wise man, you understand we are recording this. So
as a shot in beer, that's like my that's my go-to.
40 hands recently, so I want to see Rob doing that.
We'll see. Maybe next episode. Yeah.
So that'll be part 2 of the Bitcoin has 100K episode.
Yeah. Robert drinks 40 Everclear right out of the bottle.
Yeah.
Be a very short episode.
Yeah, just bye.
Yeah. Boys, we got a pretty jam-packed schedule, right? Things lot to talk about. It's not always the case, so it's kind of fun when there's a lot of things going on. Obviously, CPI came out. There's some macro stuff we can get into, and then certainly not short of regulatory news coming out with news around custody of assets within the asset space come out from the SEC, and then also some news around Kraken. So maybe we can touch that before we dive into some more like crypto focused stuff around layer 2s. Can geek out a little. What do you say?
Sounds good.
I love it.
Yeah, man. So I don't know, like CPI. What are we thinking? Inflation on the uptrend?
Yeah. So it's the core PCE, the Fed's favorite metric, was slightly higher than expected. The market actually took a big dip from that today. Not just crypto. Crypto started off like $1,000, but for Bitcoin, but also equities and treasury yields skyrocketed as well. So there's definitely a bigger anticipation of a potential 50 basis point hike. So last like a month ago, it was like 1% probability. Last week, it was like 20, and now it jumped to 30, 35. I think I saw it as higher today. Do I think they'll do 50? No. I think they'll still do 25 because why not? This is small changes, right? This is not really going to push them from 1 month to month to go more than 25. But it definitely gives you an indication that dots are going to change, or this longer term trend. I mean, I don't know, because you had been reading some interesting stuff about the inflation targets. You want to talk a bit about that?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple interesting things, and once again, I'll repeat the fact that if you're not following Nick Timiraos on Twitter, please do. He's the Wall Street Journal's like in-house economist, and the Fed basically uses him as their mouthpiece to like float ideas whenever they want it to hit the public. And he tweeted 2 particular research papers from the Fed this week. The first was one basically saying that the Cleveland Fed did some research, and the tone of the research paper was like, listen, guys, if you want 2% inflation, you're about to get fucked. And we're going to have a very deep and a hard recession. But on the flip side, what if we float this idea that you guys settle for like 2.8% inflation instead of 2% inflation, and we just kind of like move the goalpost a little bit, and that way I think we could actually engineer a soft landing. And I think the thing to note is that the Fed really has 2 mandates. The first is, full employment, and the second is price stability. And we're really fucking focused on price stability right now, but we forget that they also have this mandate of having full employment. So it would not surprise me if the Fed kicks the can down the road a little bit and chooses to, loosen the target on 2%, let it ride at slightly higher than the target inflation for a couple of years versus risking front loading too dramatically and causing a massive problem in the credit markets. Because when I look at the data, the thing that scares me are things like, for example, you've got housing mortgage applications which are at an all-time low. Our housing market is literally one of the biggest financial markets in the world. You've got commercial real estate, which is about to just get steamrolled. And if you think of the implications of all of those variable rate, commercial real estate loans that are about to get defaulted on if we keep rates this high for very long, that's going to be massively stupid. And you also have this huge shadow economy of, private equity funds that have taken out variable rate levered loans on something like $3 trillion worth of companies in the U.S., which a large slug of those is going to come due for rolling into new loans in the end of 2023-24. So I just don't think that the SEC wants to like fuck around and find out about these types of events. So I agree with Matt. I think that like they're kind of okay justifying and moving the goalpost a little bit on inflation. I think the real economy and specifically the debt market, I think we've talked a bit before about how Gary Gensler gives less than 2 shits about your crypto and your equities. But like he really fucking cares about the debt market, right? Because that's their bread and butter. Like that's the largest economy. Okay. So I'm kind of the opinion that they've done the damage they needed to do in the economy. And I guess maybe the other argument that I'll make is that January inflation always tends to come in a little bit hot because you end up getting, resetting of pricing. A lot of pricing structures in America are done on an annual basis. So, for example, things like energy or whatever, they'll reset your prices every year, or when you renew stuff at the beginning of the year. So, like, it almost is very difficult to model that.
There are also some pretty big social reforms that meant that people got a 8 or 9% bump in line with inflation for this year. So people just generally had some extra cash.
Have you guys seen? I would imagine a lot of that would be baked into expectations, like having it come in. But am I interpreting what you said as they typically undershot the expectations that typically undershot in January? And you think it tends to overshoot actual, even with expectations? Interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, I think everyone, for whatever reason, was just like, "Hey, inflation's coming down, cool." And I mean, so like the interesting thing too is like CPI, it missed expectations, but it was still under last month's print. PCE tends to be a bit more volatile. because it's the least sticky of any of the things, and it can fluctuate quite aggressively. It's like we're basically using one data point to freak the fuck out. And I think, earlier in the month, we kind of had this conversation about how the market was pricing in the rosiest of pictures, and off of the back of, a couple data points that were pretty much in line with expectations. Because if you look at, for example, like CPI was pretty much in line with expectations. GDP was almost exactly in line with expectations. PCE comes in hot and everyone's like, oh, fuck, we're done. Sell it all. So it's a bit of just sort of like a schizophrenic market at the moment.
Mm.
I mean, yeah, definitely does make bonds look very attractive, though. That's for sure. Like you're basically gonna hit at least 5% as of next month. That's pretty good return.
Yeah. No, and here's the thing. I think actually my money would be on the Fed doing 25 versus 50. But I wouldn't be surprised if they decide to keep doing 25 for longer. So what we'll likely end up seeing, in my view anyway, is the dot plot on the Fed shift up a little bit.
Yep.
And the terminal rate that we reach when the Fed is done, hiking will be higher than expected. But I don't think they're going to do it as aggressively now as they had in the past.
Yeah. I mean, especially with numbers like this, it's not that bad. Like, there's no reason to adjust 50 bips again.
Yeah.
It is coming down still. So, yeah.
Interesting. Before we move on to some of the more crypto focused stuff, I was kind of curious your thoughts on whether inflation and Fed rate hikes are being completely priced into the market, like how efficient that is. I think I've heard some talks in general just about whether, the general philosophy used to be it would take a while for these things to get baked into the markets. But I was actually catching up with a friend over lunch that works at a very large hedge fund, and they were actually thinking it actually seems like to be priced in a lot faster this cycle than perhaps in others. Have you guys had any thoughts on it?
They have been priced in.
Yeah.
But at least the last few, they've been pretty much bang on. Obviously, towards the start of last year, no, they weren't priced in. But as the Fed have been like, we're going to keep hiking, I think it's become clear and the market has adjusted to basically what the Fed say they're going to do, they pretty much do. So if you're trying to bet against the Fed right now, expecting the market's still anticipating later in the year that there'll be a reduction still. Like, I don't think that's going to happen. But the swap rates and the Fed fund futures are definitely pricing in a 25 bip hike next month. And that kind of plays out for the subsequent two further meetings. And then end of the year, I think they're pricing a cut, which now I would probably be like, no, I don't see that actually happening. They might pause, but I don't see a cut coming in.
To me, it might just be my my small, quirky network of friends, but the idea of the Fed cutting rates this year seems to have faded away amongst the people I talked to a long time ago. So I'm like, who in the market, who in the market is doing this? It's like I like to think I have smart people that are around me, and everyone thinks that's ridiculous for a while now.
No, I mean, I still think that there are people that are irrational and high on hopium right now. Is really what it comes down to.
Well, I mean, sorry, go ahead, Carlos. Sorry.
I was just saying, to your earlier point about, our investors pricing in inflation, I think what we've learned in this cycle more than anything, and we actually talked about this with Yang, 2 weeks ago, is that the Fed has forced everybody in every asset class to be a macro investor now. And so all the people that, used to work in real estate and tech funds and, venture capital are suddenly now macro prognosticators because they've been forced to be by the Fed. So yeah, I think like maybe in times past, everyone's like, we don't really give a shit about inflation. That's just a thing that's always at 2%. Tips are boring. No one wants that shit. I'm going to go, excuse me. I'm going to run this big ass model about, free cash flows on this startup, and then I'm going to make $1 bajillion. Now everyone's like, actually, hold on a second. Let's think a little bit about what the Fed's going to do. And so I think that's probably one of the reasons why we've been more reflexive as a market to these data dependencies. And I think the other point that we talked about with Yang that I think is really critical to reiterate is that in some ways, I think maybe we're being too data dependent, right? Because the Fed has basically placed all of these hopes on sort of like, oh yeah, like we need, let's wait and see what happens with the data. Now, every bit of data that used to be a boring old release is suddenly like this huge thing that moves markets, and in some ways, I think that it's probably incumbent on the Fed to be more clear about some benchmark figure that it's going to use when it's being data dependent, instead of being so murky about like, oh, we're just going to be data dependent. We'll figure it out as we go, right? Like that's almost like when I take my wife out to dinner and she's like, where do you want to go? It's like, I don't know. We'll play it by ear. Let's see what like strikes me. It's like, no, there's nothing that you could do to piss off your wife more than to not have a plan for what you want to do on date night. And I think that they've been playing it by ear for far too long. And, more than anything, I think they probably need to give further guidance in terms of like, this is a range of things that we think will actually stop us from doing 25 bips and 50 bips. Because right now the market's just whipsawing off of these like really tiny numbers that shouldn't be causing as much turmoil in the market.
And that's why, like you said, the Cleveland Fed giving that hint that they might go for a higher target inflation rate. I think, well, it's not clear if that's the case because this is just like a publication. It's not saying they're going to do it, but maybe they are laying the groundwork for some policy easing.
And to credit Yang again, sorry, they also published another paper that was basically like, oh yeah, 3.5% of inflation can be explained by supply shocks caused by COVID.
COVID. Sure.
And if you think about the impact of China reopening and, China reopening sans supplying Russia with fucking military aid. So long as those supply chains reopen, if you believe that, then you also believe that, that network of just-in-time inventory in the global supply chain is going to cause a massive decrease in goods inflation as well, which could be a huge tailwind.
Yeah, kind of curious how much. Like I heard that. I haven't read the report, but I wonder how much of that 3.5% has been already factored into the reduction in interest rates, or like how much of that 3.5% is still left to eat through. Yeah. Well, I mean, move it. I mean, now we again. I'm trying to lay the gauntlet down. Try to get. I'm gonna play rough referee here. Let's go.
Shut the fuck up, guys.
You're boring me. Keep going.
God, rates, blah blah. Let's talk about something more interesting. Our favorite human being, Gary Gensler. What do you say?
Oh my goodness! You know how much I love Gary Gensler.
Gary,
he's my
boy
bro.
Oh man, that guy has been busy. I know that he has been super busy. A lot of stuff. I'm like, where should we even begin? I know where we should begin. Yeah.
We should begin by lauding his social media game. That motherfucker makes a mean TikTok video, I'll tell you that.
I'm waiting for his dance moves. I
mean, dude looks like he could throw down. That's all I'm going to say.
Oh, yeah. He looks very limber. Like, he could definitely
he's lean. He's lean for an older gentleman. You know?
Do you think he's like a runner? What do you think?
You wouldn't outrun him.
Exercise?
He'll catch you.
Yeah. I think he definitely looks like he trains some sort of endurance training. So
I should know this. But he lives in Massachusetts.
That or he has like a vegan diet or something like that.
Yeah, nothing scarier than running down a dark alley and having Gary Gensler chasing you from behind.
I mean,
that would be scary.
Probably followed with like Elizabeth Warren in tow.
Very, very scary. Guys, Kraken's out of staking maybe for good. I mean, I know that there are not a lot of, maybe something might happen in the future, but that was wow. It's interesting to see that happen. I had to do a lot of digging around on just what that meant for the broader stake. Like, what does this mean for other staking providers? What is this a stance on staking in general?
Well, it's nothing, because it's not a law, is it?
If you watched his TikTok video, you'd know that they didn't disclose what steak sauce and seasoning they used on the steak.
Oh, yeah.
And so, like, how are you going to know what steak to buy if they don't disclose fully what seasoning they use on it? I mean, this makes total sense to me. And then he had the nerve to go on Squawk Box the next day, and he's like, "Listen, all these guys know exactly what they want to do if they want to be registered with the SEC. We have forms on our website. Excuse me, sir. Show me the link on the website of the SEC that tells me how you register to be a staking provider. Because as far as I know, that doesn't fucking exist, and he's just gaslighting everybody." So, I mean, I love Gary Gensler, and for the record, if anyone's watching, I think he's a fine, upstanding individual who's doing a fantastic job as the SEC chair, and I, fully support all the kind and great work that he's doing for humanity.
Yeah, and the kind of work being very I mean, from what I read, like digging into the details on that, seemed like one of the major points was Kraken wasn't purely they were deciding what the rate was to pay the staking participants.
Yeah, and
because of that agency, that's really where it was. Where if it was like a pure pass through, or it's like a fixed percentage or allotment, they might not have had the same challenges. Matt, I saw you shaking your head.
No, I was agreeing. So their terms said that they would basically charge some fee for maintaining the nodes and the operational, but it wasn't clear how much of that was cost versus how much they're just charging because they can as well.
Yeah.
But to be honest, like, you kind of know what the staking returns are, and you can see what Krakens are, and then your call if you do at that point. But I mean, maybe they should have disclosed this in a more clear fashion.
In their defense, I've been on the TradFi side of the house, and I've sat in rooms with very, very, very expensive white shoe attorneys, and there is actually precedent in the law that I've had explained to me by our attorneys that basically one of the judges on the Supreme Court, I think it was the state pension fund of Louisiana, was suing one of their asset managers, and one of the terms of that was basically that the asset manager did not disclose exactly what its spread was on a trade. And the Supreme Court judge basically said, when you go to Nordstrom to buy a coat, they don't have to disclose
the markup.
They don't have to disclose what they bought the coat for. They're showing you a price, and you accept that price. Yeah. And there's actually a lot of sense in keeping your pass-through rate as being kind of a floating rate, because it could be things like your cost of compliance, to do OFAC filtering could go up and make it such that you need to change it. Could be that your technology costs to be compliant with all the various things could go up or down. So I don't fully buy the whole it's variable, and maybe they should have disclosed that better and had better recommendations. But I think there is legal precedent, because I've been on that side of the fence before as a bank, having to disclose what our fees were to clients, where we were told very seriously, right? You can tell people exactly. You need to tell people that you're charging them a fee and you're charging them a spread, but you do not, if they ask you what your mid is, or if they ask you what the percentage of that fee is, you are not obligated to tell them. So, I mean, this is like a well-known fact. So if I go back a little bit, to me, like the big issue that comes down is like, and Matt kind of nailed this, choosing to settle with the SEC does not mean that you're admitting guilt. It's not legal precedent. It's really just a company saying, listen, we've done the math, and we don't think it's in our best interest, whether it be willpower or resources to fight this, to litigate this in court. So fuck it, we'll just pay the fee and be done with it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, Jesse Powell seemed a bit frustrated because he's like, "Oh, just all I had to do was tick a form, and I would have been good."
Yeah, I wouldn't have had to pay $30 million and exit a very profitable business. Cool.
All I had to do. Where are my college interns that would download SEC forms? You guys cost me.
Well, and I think this is also kind of a fun thing. So, like later on in the week, Gary Gensler released another TikTok video about our good friends over at Citadel. Not naming them by name, but talking about, how bad it was that payment for order flow existed in the equity markets. Now, what you'll notice is that he did not accompany that with names of firms or with any action. So,
yeah, I didn't know what he's doing. He said we're sorting it out. I was like, well, what are you doing?
It's like, yeah, we're gonna have a public blog or podcast about it, and we're gonna publish that. It's like, cool. So basically, what you're saying is that you're allowing payment for order flow to exist. By your records, you say that it's 1.5 billion in costs to retail investors. I think that's total bullshit because Citadel Securities made $7.5 billion last year, and they're just one of maybe a handful of people. I think it's at least an order of magnitude off. But even still, basically what you're saying is, yeah, we're allowing this to happen. I'm not going to tell you what it's going to do. And we published, we went after Kraken for something very small, and we gave them some regulatory, action as a result of this. But because we don't want to mess around with people that donate all the money and have deep pockets to fight us in court, we're just going to back off on this. We're just going to float this out there so that we can appear to have, some sort of like,
we're doing something.
Yeah, it's like, listen, guys, we're totally doing something to help you out. And to me, that's total, BS.
Yeah, I'll watch that one closely because I'm really curious to know what they actually do, what laws or what rules or regs they're going to put in place to prevent it. I'm really keen to see how that develops.
I guess is nothing.
Well, I agree. That's.
I saw the CEO of Virtu replied in Gary Gensler's comments and was basically like, I challenge you to a debate in Congress. You bring your data, I'll bring mine.
Yeah, I love it.
I was like, listen, bro, you do not want to mess around with that. These guys are making way, way, way too much money. Like, if you're going to do this, like, it's almost like a one-shot, one-kill sort of thing. Like, if you're going to come at guys like Citadel and Virtu and Tower and Jump and whomever else, these guys are pulling in billions and billions and billions of dollars in cash off of this, like, federally mandated, rigging of the equity markets for retail investors. You think they're going to go down without a fight? No, that ain't it, bro.
So I have a question then for you guys. Like, we're talking about these big wigs, right? Financial contenders in the space, these heavyweights versus new entrants within the digital asset space, and having to bump up against regulators that are, let's say, like, for lack of a better term, I could probably find a more astute way to phrase this, but picking on the little guys because it's easy. So if these, so what does this mean for the future, for example, for the future of staking? Or like, how should the audience out there be thinking about their staking rewards? How do we see this falling out? It feels like from the tone, staking itself is not being under threat, so that will exist, most likely by offshore where they are out of reach of the SEC, so that can exist in a decentralized fashion. And then maybe possibly it will exist in the US, but through the adoption by larger institutional players, the bigger guys that the SEC can poke around.
Yeah, and that's really the sad thing is that so to have a node, you need 32 ETH, which is currently 40 odd grand, which isn't a small amount of money. So if you wanted to use an intermediary, like Kraken was providing a good service to get people involved into it, right? Get some return.
And for the record, their staking service was on average about 10% cheaper
than the other guys.
Than Coinbase.
Yeah. So
one of the reasons why I chose to stake on Kraken versus Coinbase is I looked at the fees. Ethereum on Coinbase was like 25%, and Kraken was 15%. So, I mean, you do the math. Like, do I care that they didn't explicitly guarantee me 25%? I mean, like, great. Yeah. What's the cost? What's the cost of that explicit, fixed fee?
Yeah. Maybe we can touch on the Paxos news that came out. Obviously, they host Binance USD. I also sent some similar like ripples through the digital asset markets just around whether SEC is coming out and making a stance on stable coins. It doesn't really seem like that's the case either. It seems to be a lot more targeted, similar to Kraken and staking. Maybe we want to touch on this for like a quick couple of minutes before we move on.
Well, this one's actually sort of interesting because with Kraken, they didn't explicitly say staking was bad. They said that Kraken's disclosure was bad.
Yeah.
With Paxos, it appears to me that they are actually going after the route of calling stablecoins an unlicensed security. Now, I guess there's two views on that. The first is that potentially you could call Binance USD a security because it's tightly linked with, Binance Coin or BNB, right? And so, like, because it works in conjunct with a different asset, then it can be considered a security. But I think one of the biggest legal analysis that I've seen is that basically, like, stable coins don't meet at least one of the critical criteria for the Howey test, which is an expectation of profit, right? Like if you buy in USD, USDC, or Binance USD or USDT, I mean, it's the equivalent of buying a gift card, right? It's just pegged to the US dollar, and there's no expectations of profits to buy something that's fully pegged to the US dollar. So, how does that qualify as a security? So I think it'll be interesting, and I think both for staking and for stable coins, the SEC somewhat painted itself into the corner, because if they choose to go after, for example, USDC or Coinbase, they're going to have a much larger fight on their hands. You think about it, like USDC is backed by Goldman Sachs, BlackRock, and Bank of New York Mellon. And they make like, $4 or $5 billion a year in interest expense. So if someone comes after that, they're going to fight that in court. The SEC is going to have a very big litigation on its hands, and Coinbase has already stated they want to step in and fight that in court as well. So to me, it should be interesting to see how this shakes out, because this one, I think the SEC overextended itself a little bit by making the classification that a stablecoin could be considered a security.
Yeah, I didn't realize that. I thought it was a little bit more targeted towards Paxos and the way they were conducting things. Interesting.
That was the New York Financial Services. Matt, I'll let you.
Yeah, I was going to say, so they put a ban on them issuing more because of some AML policies that they didn't believe they were following correctly.
Interesting.
Which I can get behind. I think that's actually probably sound governance, right? You need KYC and AML. That drawing the line in the sand about whether or not it's security is something that I take issue with.
Yeah, it was just very strange how they both came exactly the same time, though, as well. Coincidence or not, I don't know.
I personally think that it's regulation by enforcement, which we've already talked about before.
Continues,
I hate it. Yeah. And then the other problem that I have is that I think it's the SEC basically making a land grab to call anything it possibly can a security, because one thing that we know about bureaucrats, especially politically motivated bureaucrats, and Gary Gensler definitely has his eye on being Secretary of Treasury, is that they want to expand their fiefdom. They want more control, which means more budget and more employees and more notoriety. So to me, this kind of screams a bit of a land grab.
Yeah, it's interesting to see how this plays out with other larger players that perhaps are like you mentioned, like Circle or some of these other larger players that run stable coins. If they'll just be left out of it, or whether SEC will try to make moves on them as well. Maybe we, speaking of large players, Coinbase. This is kind of interesting. Segueing over to some more crypto focused news.
You did that so much nicer than the last time. Last time you told us to shut the fuck up, and this time you had like a very smooth segue. It was nice.
it's psychological warfare on you guys. I want to keep you guys on your toes. Not
nice.
sort of flinching.
This is like the Stanford Milgram experience. You're the inmate in the prison right now.
Yeah, exactly. Should I shock you? I don't know. So Coinbase is entering the on-chain space, right? They're getting into L2 layer 2 networks. Through optimism and optimistic roll up. Maybe it would be helpful before we kind of get into those details for the guests out there that do not have as much insight into layer 1s and layer 2s. Obviously, we're talking within the Ethereum network, kind of like what the backdrop is for layer 2s really quick at a high level. So just as a quick a high level overview, guys and gals, of course. So within the Ethereum network, one of the biggest challenges for scaling that blockchain has been block space. There's been a lot of demand, and pricing was determined through supply and demand metrics. Way more demand than there was supply means that the transaction costs to transact on that network were prohibitively high. So in order to solve for that, there's been a lot of efforts and resources built into using the Ethereum blockchain more as a settlement network, and building on top of that more nimble protocols that can be used as transaction tools that can be done cheaply while still leveraging the security of the Ethereum network. There are a number of different ways that you can tackle this problem. Two of the biggest ones that we've seen out there are optimistic and ZK rollups. The main difference, and help me out with this, guys, if I mess this up, but optimistic rollups, they're a little bit farther along in development. They're currently on chain. People are using them a lot more. They work more as transactions are held within that network. And there is a time period before you are able to pull value out of that layer 2 to allow anyone who has a disagreement with the transactions that have been done on there. So it kind of provides a backstop safety network if there's a transaction that doesn't fit right. With the ZK rollups, it doesn't have that delay. So there's a constant interaction between the layer 2 blockchain and the settlement blockchain, so Ethereum. So it can act a little bit more dynamic there. But I think there are some complexities that are actually outside of my wheelhouse. And I also know, Carlos,
I'll pick up a little bit there to talk about what I think of the nuances and complexities. So optimistic is called optimistic because it makes the assumption that all transactions are valid. And then what ends up happening, like you said, is that it makes the assumption all transactions are valid. It takes all those transactions, it nets them down, or it compresses them, and then it puts them in the block space as basically one net, right? One net transaction. And you have to wait because the key is because it makes the assumption optimistically that all transactions are valid, it allows people basically to go in and audit those transactions to say, these are good. And like you said, it's significantly easier to do that, but there's no guarantee that they are secure in real time, and all transactions are fully disclosed. A ZK snark stands for zero knowledge, non-interactive argument of knowledge. So basically what that means is, or rather zero knowledge, succinct, non-interactive argument of knowledge. And what that basically means is that you have these cryptographic methods to test at all times that these are valid. And the validator does not need, because it's all encrypted, doesn't need to have knowledge of what the individual transactions are. And so the benefit of this is that these ZK snarks are instantly recognized as being valid transactions. And because they're compressed and rolled up, not individually, it remains private and somewhat anonymous. So because of that extra complexity, you get really cool shit, but it's hard to do. and it's not fully baked out. If you listen to the stuff that Vitalik Buterin has said, his preference is for ZK Snarks.
Yeah, that's kind of
optimism's here right now.
Yeah,
you can use it, and so why wait for something perfect? Why let the perfect be the enemy of the good? And I guess there's also one other application that I think is probably worthwhile talking about, and that's the concept of side chains, right? Because
like Polygon
roll up, both will roll up. So Optimism and Arbitrum are optimistic roll ups, and then you have like ZK Snarks, which are ZK Snarks, obviously. All of those work on the Ethereum blockchain, so you are guaranteed the security of the Ethereum blockchain, and that's a very important thing.
Extremely.
Now, you can also have a side chain. And what does a side chain do, right? A side chain operates as a separate blockchain that independently runs nodes and can do so faster, usually because they make trade-offs about either security or centralization. And that's the big trade-off. When you want blockchains to go faster, you usually have to make a choice to accept more centralization and or less security. One of the reasons why Ethereum is slow is because it has been uncompromising on the security and the decentralization of its nodes. So, for example, Polygon is a cool feature, and Vitalik has basically said, I support these guys. I think their mission is fantastic, and it's a great stopgap until we can get the technology in place for Ethereum. Mm-hmm. Which is like, let's say you want to build using the Ethereum virtual machine. So let's say you're a programmer and you want to build using Ethereum smart contract language. You want it to be portable on any Ethereum network. But you also don't want to pay $50 a transaction in gas fees, and you need it to settle more than once every 10 seconds. Well, then you can use something like Polygon, which is perfectly portable into Ethereum, but it's not secured by the Ethereum blockchain. Mm-hmm. It's secured by the Polygon blockchain. So you do need to make, trade-offs. But like that being said, maybe you don't need the full security of the Ethereum blockchain. Maybe you just kind of want an application that does cool stuff, and you're like, yeah, you know what? Like, we're selling video game avatars or something like that. So this is super cool. Eventually, this block information will get compressed and find its way onto the Ethereum blockchain. Yeah. But for now, we're happy just doing it on this side chain and kind of leveraging the technological benefits of Ethereum, but getting it faster, but maybe slightly less secure.
I think that's a great backdrop too, because obviously there was a lot of news coming out. There's a few other high-end and other sports retailers that came out saying they were going to start offering NFTs and other goodies on chain, and a lot of them were using Polygon. And to your point, I think that's a great explanation for what their decision making, the rationale for that decision making, is that the things that they're offering don't have a high monetary value, and it can be done so nothing. There's not a huge risk of loss there. Yeah. Great explanation.
So in my view, there's going to be a world for all of these things, right?
Yeah,
and you're just going to make choices. But I think the one constant, I think this is one of the most amazing things about the Coinbase decision to use Optimism for Coinbase Base, is that it is a massive vote of confidence for the thesis that Ethereum will be the world's settlement layer.
Yeah.
And so if you believe that, then you basically say, through a combination of side chains, optimistic rollups, and ZK rollups, we're going to leverage the security of the Ethereum network for basically any combination of tokenized asset, which could include things like BlackRock choosing to tokenize stocks and bonds, or other financial instruments onto a blockchain. It could be Major League Baseball putting out baseball cards on Polygon, which then find their way through. But anything in the spectrum to like super high value things that you want to be able to exist directly on the chain, to lower value things that you're totally fine, being in Polygon and then being shuttled over via a sidechain method over to the main chain on Ethereum. What you're saying is, at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. We're going to have choices, but the final destination for settlement will always be the Ethereum block space.
Yeah, I'm so interested to see how all of this plays out with Coinbase. It's kind of interesting to see some of these CeFi firms make a transition over to the on-chain space.
I think there's some other interesting things about this that I think are actually I'm pretty optimistic about. No pun intended. So Coinbase is opting not to make its own token for this, which isn't needed in optimistic rollups. And right now it's centralized, but in their blog post, they talked about how there is a path and the intention is to make it fully decentralized, which to me is quite interesting because people were worried that Coinbase was going to make a layer 2 application that was sort of like a walled garden for KYC, AML, and would only really be used by institutional clients. This seems like it's more in line with the ethos of crypto. And so it will be interesting for me to see if they stick to that. I think it's probably better in the long run for the overall Ethereum ecosystem that it remains decentralized and open source. And I think that there's still enough profit, motivation. So for example, like I think Arbitrum makes like a couple $100 million a year just off of like processing fees that they make in ETH and like, doing all this. So it could very well be a profit center, but I hope that Coinbase kind of like avoids the profit motive because they could also find it's like, you know what, why don't we just lock this up, make it like the special institutional KYC AML version of it, and charge huge fees to people like BlackRock and Fidelity and whomever else to operate on this chain, and then we'll call it a day.
Is the motive for Coinbase doing this to provide almost like a I don't know if it's like I know it's centralized for now, but it's like bridge it over to become almost like a decentralized exchange for like you mentioned. A decentralized exchange almost, just allow transactions that take place?
I'm not sure their intention is that. I think it's literally just have a place for people to build dApps to start with. But
I mean, I think there is an argument, and we had talked about this as well, which is sort of like, what value does crypto have if the utility never comes in?
Yeah.
Right? Like right now, Ethereum is valuable because we assume there's going to be all this utility on it. And if you're a company like Coinbase and you have quite a bit of, Bitcoin and Ethereum sitting on your balance sheet, it probably behooves you to contribute to the ecosystem that makes crypto sort of like a mainstream part of the masses. If you think of like the percentage of people in the world that use crypto, and I'm not talking about percentage of people that own crypto, I'm talking about the percentage of the people that actually use, DeFi protocols and have own NFTs and that sort of stuff. I don't think it's ubiquitous nearly as we believe it is or should be at the moment.
Yeah.
And part of that is obviously based on just, how it scales and what the fees are to build these type of applications. So I think it's more of like a rising tide raises all boats type of scenario.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Plus, it's also profit motive. They'll make money by being, processor of fees.
Yeah. But it's interesting you say about them not having it as like a private closed blockchain where they can just have institutional guys on it, because like if you think about it, that's kind of what MasterCard are doing for like payments. Like they have their own blockchain, it's internal, and they're now trying to onboard to speed up transactions across institutions as well. So like you could see how you could easily turn it into something like that. But obviously that's a very narrow focus. Like the whole point of the smart contract landscape is you could build anything, like the whole dApp premise.
Yeah.
It's a web platform. So I'm really, kind of pleased that they're pushing it because they have a lot more capital to pump in, and it's great for Ethereum.
Sweet. So I was really excited about it. That's awesome, guys. I think we went through a lot today.
And we did it on time.
Crushed it.
Well done, everybody.
Tried to keep my mouth closed. It's hard. It's hard for me. I'm a talker. Boys.
Well, this is why you're the moderator in chief.
Laying down the gauntlet. You'll see me double fisting next week, guys.
Excellent.
Oh, I can't wait.
Shot in the beer.
I can't wait. Done.
There should be a forfeit.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that. If you don't bring your drink, you have to forfeit the next one.
You have to do a shot and a beer the next time.
Yeah.
It just grows cumulatively.
Yeah, it does.
Like if I go for like a sober month, it's just going to be pretty.
You're in trouble. Yeah.
I was just saying, like Matt was telling me earlier, if he gives up beer for Lent properly, what's he going to do every Friday?
Yeah, he'll drink
Exactly.
scotch.
Well, that was the plan. Yeah.
It's hilarious, guys. Thanks for joining.
Thanks.
Thanks everybody.
Bye.